Archie Bunker sat in his chair and began to speak in 1971. America was sent into a complete collapse by what he said. The White House also became involved. President Nixon personally attempted to have the show banned, according to secret tapes. Prior to Norman Lear risking everything on America's most despised television figure, networks had always been cautious. Today we show you how television was transformed by a man's racist tirades. Norman Lear saw a brief story on the British sitcom Till Death Us Do Part in early 1967 while perusing Variety magazine. The main character was a grumpy working-class father who was often at odds with his left-leaning son-in-law. That description resonated with Lear for some reason. He purchased the rights even though he had not seen any of the episodes. Although he thought the program was too severe for American television when he ultimately watched it, the main notion was still compelling. He therefore created something new using elements from his own life rather than replicating it. Archie, the protagonist, was more than simply a made-up figure. He was somewhat modeled after Lear's own father, who was said to as the laziest white man I ever saw, and who would holler at his mother to make her stop. Eventually the phrases rose to prominence as some of the most well-known catchphrases on American television. Lear's risk was profitable. In 1968, the first effort was made to air the show on American television. It was filmed as an ABC pilot and was titled Justice for All. Archie and Edith were portrayed by O'Connor and Gene Stapleton. However, Justice was their last name at the time. The names of other characters also varied. Lionel Jefferson continued to appear in the novel, while Michael Stivich was referred to as Dickie. The first pilot revolved around an unexpected anniversary celebration that swiftly descended into a social issues dispute. However, ABC wasn't prepared. The show was turned down by the network, which said that the duo lacked chemistry and that it was too edgy. Lear remained persistent. He approached CBS for funds so he could try again. Those Were the Days was the title of the second pilot, which was shot in 1969. Stapleton and O'Connor were retained, while other parts were replaced. The tone was a bit milder, but the plot was same. A few minor adjustments were made. Archie was given a little more fragility, and Edith had more bite. This version did not yet feature the famous Manhattan skyline, but it did debut the theme tune that we now know so well. Although CBS didn't immediately embrace it, they had a change of heart a year later. They instructed Lear to change the family's name from Justice to Bunker and call the program All in the Family. Lear concurred. Everything finally came together at that point. There was a point in 1970 when things might have turned out quite differently. In the beginning, Norman Lear intended Mickey Rooney to portray Archie Bunker. However, Rooney was taken aback by Lear's description of the role, particularly the racial remarks and harsh viewpoints. He warned Lear that putting on such a spectacle may result in his being shot on the street. Rooney rejected it, claiming it was not American. Carol O'Connor, who would make the part legendary, was made possible by that choice. O'Connor was first seen by Lear in a 1966 movie, in which he portrayed a boisterous, flamboyant army officer. Lear claimed that he recognized O'Connor's face right away as being suited for television. Lear was astounded by O'Connor's audition and instantly recognized him as Archie. But O'Connor wasn't entirely certain. He only agreed to take on if Lear offered to provide him a return ticket to Rome in case the production failed, as he believed it would fail. Rather than failing, O'Connor became well known, garnered 4 Emmys, and gave nuance to a character who once appeared to be wholly unlikable. Another important component was Gene Stapleton. Lear had been having trouble casting Edith until he recalled watching Stapleton in Damn Yankees on Broadway. She wasn't merely a line-reading actress. She discovered Edith's secret strength on their first encounter. She was aware that despite her seeming ignorance, Edith frequently used a single statement to undermine Archie's confidence. Edith's distinctive high-pitched voice was even Stapleton's own invention. That voice was immortalized on television. She remained for the whole length of the program, but she departed after only a few spin-off episodes because she didn't want to continue after her character's time on the show was up. Rob Reiner's journey to the show began in his early childhood. Norman Lear was good friends with his father, Carl Reiner, who was a comedic superstar. Lear informed Carl, "Your kid is really funny," after he noticed little Rob making jokes while playing jacks during their early 1950s vacation. At the time, Carl called him surly because he didn't see it. Lear, however, recalled, he cast Rob as Archie's liberal son-in-law, Meathead. Years later, the concert was not the end of their friendship. Rob's early directing endeavors, like as This Is Spinal Tap, were ultimately funded by Lear. Reiner claimed he never would have pursued a career as a director if it weren't for Lear. To play Gloria, Sally Struthers had a surprise trip of her own. Rob Reiner was already cast when she tried out. Penny Marshall, his ex-girlfriend, was also trying out. She had no chance, Struthers thought. As a pair, Penny and Rob would naturally click. Additionally, Penny resembled Jean Stapleton more. However, the portion went to Struthers. She asked Lear whether she had been the funniest actress years later. No, he said. She claims that Lear claimed that her wide face and blue eyes helped her get the part, similar to Carol O'Connor. In this manner, viewers would sympathize with Archie more. They would see how much he cared for his daughter. Viewers would relate to Archie as a parent even if they didn't agree with his statements. Despite its bluntness, that casting decision obviously succeeded. Struthers went on to win 2 Emmys and make appearances in 157 episodes. But it all began with a catastrophe. Turn On, a sketch comedy show ABC ran in 1969 in the hopes that it would become the next great thing, was taken off the air by stations nationwide within minutes. In Cleveland, one channel didn't even wait until the very end. After the first commercial break, it abruptly ended the broadcast and issued a vehement message to ABC telling them to basically never do it again. The audience detested it. ABC received a ton of complaints. The show was discontinued 5 days later. The network became scared of anything even somewhat contentious as a result of the entire situation. Therefore, ABC froze when Norman Lear arrived with a pilot about a loud, racist figure named Archie Bunker. They didn't want to deal with another catastrophe. The main character had strong ideas about everything, cursed and made fun of minorities. ABC was unwilling to take that type of risk again after what transpired with Turn On. They rejected the show, but CBS had a different perspective. In order to make place for storylines that seemed more authentic, they were clearing out outdated sitcoms like Green Acres and the Beverly Hillbillies. In addition to families keeping watch on the farm, they also aimed to appeal to younger urbanites. As a result, CBS purchased the rights to Norman Lear's program when they had the opportunity, renamed it, Kept the Family, and began developing a new version with Carol O'Connor, Jean Stapleton, Rob Reiner, and Sally Struthers. CBS wasn't too sure though. To test the waters, they scheduled the event for a late Tuesday night, immediately following Hee Haw. Only 13 episodes were ordered. Nobody had high expectations. Then January 12, 1971 arrived. Viewers weren't eased in by the first episode. It struck them hard. Archie Bunker started yelling as soon as he got home from church. He said a series of derogatory remarks in a single moment that left everyone speechless. Within minutes, it was all out of Archie's lips. He made it obvious that he lacked a filter by making fun of his son-in-law and insulting his wife. It was unlike anything CBS has ever broadcast. Before the broadcast, they even ran a disclaimer alerting viewers to the fact that the purpose of the show was to laugh at prejudice in order to highlight how absurd it is. The network was holding its breath behind the scenes. To deal with the anticipated influx of complaints, they hired more phone operators. However, an odd event occurred. They expected the phones to ring, but they didn't. Yes, several individuals were perplexed. Some people wanted to know if the show will return. There was only a rush of curiosity rather than rage. America did not explode. It leaned in. The ratings were mediocre initially. In its initial season, the show ranked 34th, but later repeats became popular. News began to circulate. "You have to see this," they informed their pals. The number of viewers increased during the summer. CBS took notice. The entire family was transported to prime real estate on Saturday night at 8 p.m. when the new season began. The risk was worthwhile. The program was a huge hit. It was at the top of the nation by the end of the 1971-72 season. It didn't just remain there for some time. It held the #1 position for 5 years in a row. That had never occurred before. Week after week, as Archie argued with his family and insulted everyone in sight, millions of people flocked around their TVs to see him uncover deeper truths about America. It was genuine, unvarnished, and unpolished. The cast of All in the Family produced a Christmas episode in 1976, but it was hardly ever broadcast. One of the authors, Jay Moriarty, had written a script titled The Draft Dodger. However, it was shelved for whatever reason. His agency just informed him that Norman Lear wasn't interested, and never shared it with him. It was a falsehood. Jimmy Carter's announcement during his presidential campaign that he planned to pardon Dodgers who were drafted in Vietnam was the episode's true turning point. All of a sudden, the script was more than simply contentious. It came at the right time. The setup of the show was sure to make headlines. For Christmas dinner, Archie Bunker asked his friend Pinky Peterson over, a Gold Star parent. Pinky was in Vietnam, his son had lost his life. However, Mike's friend David, a draft dodger who had escaped to Canada, was an unexpected visitor. There was a lot of stress. Archie lost it when he discovered who David was. He thought Pinky would be equally enraged. Pinky didn't snap though. Rather, he said something that left everyone in the room speechless. He explained to Archie that he understood David's decision, despite the fact that his son had lost his life in the conflict. "David is still here to join us for Christmas dinner," he remarked. And he would want to sit down with him if Steve were around. It was a powerful moment. It wasn't only a television line. It was all of America's conflicted feelings over Vietnam gathered around one dinner table. The network executives changed their minds when CBS eventually decided to broadcast it. Some of Archie's words annoyed them, particularly when he became irate over the war. The censors couldn't stand it when he spoke the Lord's name in vain, in one outburst. Norman Lear was forced to overdub the phrase. Instead, something clumsy and forced came out. "I'm not referring to the conflict. That rotting dead one is not something I want to discuss any longer." The emotion seemed cut, and viewers observed that the audio didn't match. It was a perfect illustration of TV censoring in the 1970s, attempting to hide something unvarnished while making it much more blatant. This was nothing new to Lear. He once said that even if 50 or 60 individuals complained, network executives would go crazy. That was sufficient back then to initiate modifications. Then an event occurred that further enhanced the episode's impact. Jimmy Carter fulfilled his campaign pledge just a few weeks after it was broadcast. He signed Proclamation 4483 on his first full day of office. All people who had evaded the Vietnam draft, whether they fled to Canada or just never enlisted, were granted unconditional pardons. As a result, hundreds of thousands of men might now enter the country again without fear of prosecution. However, not everyone was content. According to polls, only 20% of Americans agreed with Carter's decision. Like the characters gathered around Archie's dinner table, the nation remained divided. Lear's Christmas Day broadcast was no longer merely a television drama. It had been recorded in history. Let's fast forward to 2019. Together with Jimmy Kimmel, Norman Lear reenacted beloved scenes for a live audience. With well-known actors like Jamie Foxx as George Jefferson and Woody Harrelson as Archie, the show live in front of a studio audience brought the entire family back to life. They practically followed the original scripts word for word, but when a racist slur appeared in one scene, ABC bleeped it out, despite the fact that the phrase had previously been used in the 1970s without editing. It demonstrated the extent of the changes. Lear had anticipated it. He had already seen that profanity that had previously been accepted without inquiry was being edited or bleeped out in repeats on networks like Antenna TV. Some viewers found his paintings to be too unvarnished even in tribute. Norman Lear remained unwavering throughout. His intention was always to stir things up, and he said it openly. That was the idea. He dedicated his life to writing these tales after being born in 1922. For instance, Archie Bunker was influenced by his own father, who advised Lear's mother to suppress her emotions. Lear wanted to do more than provoke. He aimed to depict the struggles faced by actual families. "I don't think I consciously thought that anything we were doing was controversial," he once told a reporter. However, it was. On TV, he discussed topics that no one else dared to discuss: religion, racism, abortion, and war. He didn't flinch either. All in the Family was a first for American television in the early 1970s. With its audacious comedy and unvarnished honesty, it broke taboos and enraged the nation in one episode after another. For instance, consider The Bunkers and The Swingers. When it was broadcast in 1972, it created a lot of controversy. As charming and innocent as usual, Edith Bunker responded to a personal ad from a couple seeking new acquaintances. Gloria, her daughter, was aware that it was more than just making friends. Two swingers who were eager to switch partners created the advertisement. The pair arrived early before Gloria had a chance to tell her mother. Vincent Gardenia and Rue McClanahan played that couple, Curtis and Ruth Rempeli, with amusing charm. In an attempt to establish the scene, they arrived with pricey presents, including excellent cigars for Archie and French perfume for Edith. Unaware as ever, the Bunkers meanwhile accepted everything at face value. Every harmless remark is misinterpreted by the visitors as a romantic innuendo. Curtis once referred to Edith as a wildcat in disguise, and expressed admiration for Archie's master's chair. The type of sluggish, uncomfortable humor that made viewers wriggle and chuckle was created by the tension between innocence and misunderstanding. Fans adored it, and it was a family classic. So did the critics. IMDb still gives the episode a 9.0 rating. The fact that all of the actors in that episode went on to win an Emmy is a remarkable accomplishment. Judging books by covers was an episode that took the concept even farther only a year prior. For the first time, a homosexual character appeared on primetime television for American comedy viewers. It was a brilliant twist. Assuming Mike's friend Roger was gay, Archie made fun of him for being effeminate. The great surprise, however, came later. The person who was gay was really Archie's drinking companion Steve, a burly former football player. It was a humorous yet potent method of flipping expectations. Not everybody chuckled. While searching for a baseball game on television, President Richard Nixon, of all persons, happened to catch that episode. The now famous White House recordings captured his response. He was enraged. He demanded that the show be taken off the air, calling it pro-gay propaganda. Even at the highest levels of government, that event demonstrated how profoundly the show was upending society. However, it was precisely the purpose. The show aimed to provoke thought and reveal people's preconceptions. In the episode, Archie's reasoning was hilariously faulty. "A guy who wears glasses is a four eyes," he remarked. "A gay dude is a queer guy." The purpose of the debate was to show how absurd hatred sounded when spoken aloud. Another significant event occurred in the Henry's Farewell episode 2 years later. At that point, viewers finally had the opportunity to meet George Jefferson, a figure who had previously only been discussed. It was his brother Henry's farewell party. However, things didn't go as planned. George wouldn't enter Archie's home, and Archie wouldn't go to the Jeffersons. When they finally confronted each other, sparks flew. The scenario was full of comedy, reality, and tension. These two strong-willed, biased, and arrogant individuals had to confront one another in person for the first time. In 2019, over 50 years later, a spectacular live TV homage brought that same incident back to life. Archie was portrayed by Woody Harrelson. In George Jefferson's place was Jamie Foxx. The show was presented by Norman Lear, who is now in his 90s, with Jimmy Kimmel. A number of Emmys were earned by the popular reenactment. A few scenes were slightly altered, such as the one from the live version where Mike showers Archie while sporting a fake flower. However, the spirit persisted. The episode's enduring impact was demonstrated by the fact that it was still relevant decades later. However, the creator's intended application of that ability wasn't always realized. Archie Bunker was intended by Norman Lear to serve as a warning figure, a guy mired in the past whose opinions were supposed to be questioned and rectified by younger, more tolerant characters like Mike and Gloria. However, an odd event occurred. People began to like Archie, not in a sarcastic way, but honestly, the way Carol O'Connor portrayed him made it impossible for the audience not to identify. Some even concurred with him. He was so well known by 1972 that during the Democratic National Convention, someone really voted for Archie Bunker to be the vice president. Politicians began discussing how to get the vote of Archie Bunker. Many Americans from the working class identified with him rather than disagreeing with his opinions. This issue wasn't brand new. The similar event occurred in the British television series Till Death Us Do Part, which served as the basis for All in the Family. Strangely, its prejudiced protagonist gained popularity, and not all of the spectators were blue-collar. People from various walks of life were moved by Archie's direct communication style and skepticism about change. There were a lot of individuals who believed Archie was absolutely correct, as O'Connor himself once stated. Satire doesn't always land the way you want it to. It became evident. Laura Z. Hobson, the author, was terrified of that same thing. She accused everyone in the family of normalizing prejudice in a blistering piece that was published in the New York Times in 1971. It wasn't just any critic, Hobson. She was the author of the well-known anti-Semitic book Gentleman's Agreement, which was adapted into a successful movie. She maintained that it was risky to make Archie likable. He was surrounded by jokes, yet people continued to laugh with him rather than at him. She thought the show didn't adequately depict the actual harm caused by his opinions. Another level was added by her son, who pointed out that the play faced the risk of minimizing racism at all socio-economic levels and portraying it as a working-class issue. Norman Lear had no intention of being silent. He responded with his own essay a month later. He posed a challenging query to Hobson. Had she never encountered a person who was both loving and prejudiced? A friend, a family member, or even a parent? That was Archie's whole purpose. He wasn't a villain from a cartoon. He was genuine. His dread and inability to comprehend a world that was changing too quickly for him were the causes of his ignorance. Lear thought the program might reach a wider audience by using humor to depict that struggle. Instead of lecturing America, he aimed to hold up a mirror. The show's broadcasting network, CBS, was also concerned. A special warning was broadcast before each episode of All in the Family when it debuted on television on January 12, 1971. It stated that the purpose of the show was to ridicule people's preconceptions and, ideally, make them appear absurd. In anticipation of the influx of irate calls, they even employed more phone operators. Not many people first tuned in. Just 15% of homes tuned in to the debut. However, news got around fast. It quickly rose to the top of the nation's ratings. There was more to Gene Stapleton's departure from All in the Family than a simple contract. It was an unexpected turning moment for the supporters. Despite what the headlines said, she didn't storm out or depart in rage. She really enjoyed portraying Edith Bunker. She just thought the character had come to the end of her life. Stapleton feared becoming permanently ensnared in that job. She didn't want Edith to be her only name. She was subtly drawn away from the show by her genuine dread of being typecast. The thought of saying farewell nevertheless struck a deep chord, even if by the last season her appearances had already dwindled down. She reminded the show's creator, Norman Lear, that Edith wasn't real when they chatted. However, she was for Lear and the millions of spectators. That was the moment's weight. These were no longer merely roles, people's lives included them. Even the show itself was evolving. The close-knit familial environment began to wane. The scenario shifted from disagreements at the kitchen table to laughs in the living room to Archie's world outside the house. He purchased a bar, Kelsey's, and he even faked Edith's signature to make it his own. Fresh faces, fresh drama, and a new direction resulted from it. After arguing with Archie, Harry Snowden left, but he later rejoined as his partner. Gloria and Michael, meantime, were becoming more distant. To raise their son they moved away, but their marital problems soon became apparent. A little girl named Stephanie was taken in by Archie and Edith at the same time when her father left her. The program entered a more serious realm with these new threads. Archie and Mike's overnight entrapment in the bar's storage stands out as one of the most memorable events. Archie talked candidly about his harsh upbringing after a few beers. He declared his love for Mike for the first time. That sequence demonstrated the character's development and the show's progress since its inception. The program didn't go away softly when it eventually ceased in April 1979. There was a lot of emotion in the last episode. Too Good Edith. Unaware that Edith was concealing a severe illness, Archie asked her to manage the cuisine for his large St. Patrick's Day celebration at the pub. She kept it to herself and endured the discomfort since she didn't want to ruin his night. She had always been characterized by that type of silent sacrifice. Finally, Archie, who is often stern and protective, expressed to her how much she meant to him. "Without you I am nothing," he said. Hearts were broken by that moment. It was an honest, unvarnished, and ideal farewell. CBS, however, was unwilling to let go. The network demanded more even though Norman Lear was prepared to end the show. Carol O'Connor consented to go on, but with a requirement: they had to modify the name. Thus, Archie Bunker's place came into being. Even though it continued for 4 more seasons, something had changed. Edith was no longer there, and her absence created an unfillable void. Archie by himself in one episode demonstrated the depth of his loss. Archie stood by himself and spoke to Edith's vacant chair, pleading with her for another opportunity to express his love for her. It was heartbreaking. Nevertheless, the family's heritage endured. Maude, the Jeffersons, Good Times, and Gloria were among the many spin-offs that sprang from it. It was no longer only a spectacle, it was a universe. It altered how television addressed real-life problems, and it continued to thrive for decades after that. A live homage in 2019 revived those tales and served as a reminder of their immense impact.